It started the way disasters usually do, quiet. A low rumble in the sky, the kind that makes the windows hum in their frames, and a smell in the air like wet dirt turning over in its sleep. I'd lived beside Ash Creek my whole life, so I thought I knew her moods. She was stubborn, unpredictable, sure, but never cruel. That morning, though, as I laced up my boots and heard the wind whistle through the gate hinge, I felt something coiled in the air. Waiting. I stepped out onto the porch and the boards groaned beneath me, still swollen from days of rain. The creek wasn't angry yet, just restless. I could hear her under the cottonwoods, muttering like an old neighbor with a grudge. I pulled my jacket tighter, walked the fence line, and did what I always do in storms, checked the banks, the culverts, the spill dam Grandpa built out by the orchard. Everything was holding. My cattle were restless, hooves sinking into soft ground, but they weren't panicked. That told me we still had time. By noon, the sky broke open like a bucket dropped from heaven. Sheets of rain hammered the fields, splashing mud up the sides of my jeans. I pulled my hat low and pushed through it, sandbagging the soft spots, clearing ditches with a shovel until my arms ached. Water wants to move, you can't stop it, only guide it. That's what Dad always said. I believed him, and I thought I was ready. But nature doesn't take votes. By sunrise the next morning, Ash Creek was no longer a neighbor. She was a runaway train. I stood at the high bank, boots planted in soaked earth, and watched her muscle past, brown and swollen, tearing trees out by the roots. She didn't touch my land, not this time. She bent south instead, curved like a whip, and smashed into clear river meadows, the shiny new neighborhood folks around here never liked to mention without a sigh. I didn't go see the damage, didn't need to. Word travels faster than floodwater in a town this size. 5 houses gone under. Their fancy stone gate collapsed like a cardboard box. Power knocked out, roads chewed up, transformers sparking in the rain. Folks who'd built koi ponds and walking trails where the old-timers said, don't build there. Now they were knee-deep in muddy water, pointing fingers at the sky. I'll be honest, part of me felt a bitter kind of justice. Those same people had tried to haul me into court 5 years ago for noise pollution. Said my John Deere at 5:30 a.m. was offensive to their suburban peace. I won that fight, proved their bylaws had no hold on my land, and I figured that was the end of it. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that grudges are like rivers. They find ways to come back around. 3 days later, I was fixing a busted latch on the East Corral when I heard it, the crunch of tires on wet gravel. I wiped the sweat off my neck and looked up. Alexis, out here in the mud. That alone set my teeth on edge. Out steps this guy in a slick gray suit, shoes already sinking into the dirt. He looked like the kind of man who smelled more of dry cleaning than of rain. Leather folder tucked under his arm like it might bite him. "Mr. Hoggard?" he asked, voice soft, polite, rehearsed. "That's me," I said, squinting against the glare. He cleared his throat. "I'm here on behalf of the Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association. I've been asked to deliver a formal notice of claim." He handed me an envelope. Thick, heavy. I tore it open right there in the mud, and when I saw what was inside, I laughed so hard it startled the cattle. A check made out to the HOA. Amount, $3,200,000. I stared at him, still laughing. "You people have lost your damn minds? You think I own the river?" He didn't flinch. Just said, calm as if he was ordering a sandwich, "The HOA holds you responsible for the recent flood damage. Failure to maintain proper flood controls on your property contributed to the destruction downstream. If you sign the agreement and remit payment within 15 business days, the HOA will waive further legal action." I folded the check, slipped it into my back pocket, and looked him square in the eye. "Tell your boss she'll need a better lie than that." He left without another word, tires spitting mud as he crawled back toward the highway. The envelope was still warm in my hand when I sat down on the porch steps. The wind smelled of wet cottonwood and old rain. Ash Creek murmured in the distance, her voice low and steady. And right then I knew this wasn't about water anymore. It wasn't about rivers or rain or storms. No, this was about power. About an HOA that had already tried once to drag me down. And this time they weren't after silence. They were after blood money. $3 million worth. You'd think after handing a man a $3 million bill for rainwater, they'd sit quiet and wait for a reaction. But no. Clear River Meadows doesn't understand quiet, especially not with Karen Winters behind the wheel. The first strike wasn't a lawsuit. It was banners, big vinyl things flapping in the wind, strung across the brick entryway like they were announcing a county fair. Pay for the flood, Mr. HOGARD. Accountability SDARTS upstream. Red letters so loud you could read them from a mile away. I drove past on my way into town for feed and just shook my head. Karen must have ordered them before her lawyer even left my driveway. Then came the newspaper. Page 2 of the Valley Ledger, tucked right under a feel-good story about a rescued barn owl. A full column penned by Karen herself. When nature strikes, responsibility matters, the headline said. 3 paragraphs of legal-sounding blame dressed up like civic duty. According to her, I'd ignored decades of hydrological best practices. I'd endangered public safety. She made it sound like I'd been standing by the creek twiddling my thumbs while water climbed over the banks. It was laughable, but not everyone was laughing. At the feed store, folks who used to slap me on the back and ask about my calves now just nodded quick and turned away. Whispers carried faster than any creek. People love a villain, especially when it gives them something to talk about over coffee and donuts. I wasn't angry at them, not really. Karen just knew how to twist a story, and she twisted it good. What came next hit harder, the class action talk. My buddy Tom Delaney, poor guy stuck living in Clear River Meadows, pulled me aside one night at the diner. He leaned over his coffee like it might shield him from what he was about to say. Karen called an emergency meeting, he whispered. She's telling folks they can band together, sue you as one group. Joint litigation. She had half the room cheering. The other half, Tom said, just wanted their homes fixed. But the angry half, they wanted a scapegoat, and she'd painted my face on the target. That's when I called Julian. Julian Brantley isn't just a lawyer. He's a scalpel in a suit, sharp enough to cut through bone. He was the same man who'd saved me years ago when the HOA tried to claim my tractor was a public nuisance. He dismantled them back then like a kid tearing wings off a fly. I told him about the check, the banners, the article, the class action threats. He didn't even let me finish before chuckling low. They're trying to saddle you with riparian liability for a flood, he said. I could almost hear the grin in his voice. That's exactly what they're saying. Good, he muttered. Send me everything. Letter, article, photos. By lunch tomorrow, I'll have the Wyoming Department of Water Resources in the loop. He wasn't bluffing. 3 days later, I had paperwork in hand, official state documents. Ash Creek, it said, is a state-owned public watercourse. Non-navigable, yes, but public. My land includes a narrow buffer zone, nothing more. I had rights to water cattle and maintain the banks, but I couldn't dam it, couldn't divert it, couldn't even put in a culvert without state approval. Translation: the river wasn't mine, not even close. So if I didn't own it and I didn't control it, what the hell was I being sued for? Julian's email was blunt. They're bluffing, Daniel. This is a PR stunt with legal teeth, but the gums are rotten. I almost framed that line. But just clearing my name wasn't enough. Not this time. I wanted the truth out in daylight where even Karen's banners couldn't cover it. So I wrote a letter. No legal jargon, no threats, just plain words. Printed it, handed copies out at the feed store, the gas station, the town hall. Hell, even the diner got a stack. It read, I do not own Ash Creek. I did not alter it. I will not pay $3 million for a natural disaster I had no hand in. But I will defend myself with every legal means available. If you want the truth, you know where to find me. Same place I've always been. That letter didn't stop Karen's campaign, but it did something better. It slowed it down. Folks who'd been glaring started taking second glances. One day, I found a note tucked under my truck's windshield wiper in the grocery store lot. No name. Just 6 shaky words, we believe you, don't back down. I kept that note because I wasn't backing down. You can only take so many stones before you stop ducking and start throwing them back. And after weeks of mudslinging, I was ready to swing first. Karen wanted a fight. Fine, she'd get one. And the first punch I threw wasn't in court. It was with the press. The first time I opened my gates to the press, it felt strange. I wasn't used to cameras out here, just boots, mud, and the sound of cattle shifting in the pasture. But if Karen wanted a war of stories, I was done letting her write the only version. I didn't call the polished city reporters, the ones who wore shiny shoes and practiced their sympathy faces. No, I called the locals, the folks who'd covered tractor parades, 4-H fairs, and that one time a llama shut down the post office. People who knew me, knew the land, and wouldn't flinch if their boots got muddy. They showed up on a Saturday morning. Pickup trucks rattling down my driveway, notepads sticking out of jacket pockets, camera straps slung over shoulders. I didn't bother polishing anything up for them. No tidy angles, no stage lighting. I wanted them to see the truth, raw and unvarnished. I walked them straight to the creek, showed them the line where my easement ended, the flood markers etched high into the cottonwoods, the culverts I'd cleared myself during the storm. Mud still clung to the shovel marks. I pointed to the old dam Grandpa built, patched with sandbags and stubbornness, still holding, still standing, not a crack, not a breach. This, I told them, is what taking care of land looks like. Then I laid out the maps, topographical, stay-tissued. The shaded gray area marked seasonal floodplain. That's where Clear River meadows had been built. I jabbed a finger at the paper. Not my term, not my map. State hydrology. They built houses on a sponge and acted surprised when it soaked up water. The reporters leaned in, scribbling, snapping photos. I could see it in their faces. They weren't here for Karen's story anymore. They were here for the truth. But I wasn't done. I hired an independent hydrologist, Mara Simons, sharp as barbed wire, blunt as a hammer. She tromped out in her field boots, took samples, ran simulations, studied drone footage. A week later, she handed me a 42-page report with graphs, soil analyses, and one conclusion written in bold. Primary cause of structural flood damage, unpermitted alteration of riparian zone, and negligent failure to reinforce key erosion points by Clear River Meadows HOA. That report was dynamite, and I knew just where to throw it. But fate handed me more fuel before I even lit the fuse. Julian called one night, excitement buzzing in his voice. "You're going to like this," he said. He'd been digging through HOA records, don't ask me how he got them, and found something ugly. 2 months before the flood, the HOA board had voted to cancel a shoreline reinforcement contract. Budget cuts. A line item crossed out with Karen Winters' initials right beside it. No notice to homeowners, no community vote. Just her pen scratching safety out of existence. I leaned back in my chair, holding the phone to my ear. So they cut corners, ignored state maps, canceled safety work, and now they're trying to hang me for it. Julian chuckled low. Exactly. I was angry before, now I was insulted. That night I wrote a certified letter. No wasted words. Your continued claims constitute defamation. Your false attributions of liability are under review for civil counteraction. This is not a bluff. I attached Mara's report, signed my name at the bottom, and sent copies to every major news outlet in the state. The next day, Julian filed a counterclaim, defamation, harassment, malicious prosecution. We asked for $1 million and a cease and desist order against their smear campaign. Our paperwork was tight, mean, and ready for war. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Julian. It was a man named Harold Vince, former HOA board member. He asked to meet. Said he had something I'd want to hear. We sat down at the diner in Greystone. He looked worn out, like a man who'd been carrying someone else's mess for too long. Over coffee gone cold and pie no one touched, he spilled it all. Karen had ignored repeated warnings from engineers, brushed off contractors who begged for reinforcement work, blocked grant applications for floodplain safety because they didn't fit her timeline. She told us it was all fear-mongering, Harold muttered. She said if we made it through spring without trouble, no one would care. I clenched my jaw, so she gambled the whole neighborhood to save face. He didn't answer, but he slid a USB drive across the table. You didn't get this from me. That night I plugged it into my old laptop, and there she was, Karen Winters' voice, cold and smug, captured in a board meeting recording. If we make it through spring without a problem, no one will care about the river. It's just optics. We need the money for the landscaping project. A flooded trail is easier to fix than a PR mess with empty flower beds. I sat back in the dark, listening to her gamble lives and homes like poker chips. And that's when the last piece clicked. This wasn't about me. It wasn't even about the river. This was about Karen's power and how far she'd go to keep it. And now I had proof. I've been to court before. Land disputes, noise complaints, zoning squabbles, nothing glamorous. You go in, wear a clean shirt, argue about where a fence should stand or whether a tractor, too loud at dawn, and you go home. But this was different. This was war dressed up in neckties and binders. It started with a summons. Julian called me early one morning, his voice carrying that rare mix of annoyance and excitement. "They filed," he said. "Official class action, damages set at 3.2 million. I sat at the kitchen table, boots still muddy, envelope spread in front of me. 3.2 million for what? Negligence, Julian sighed. Public nuisance, failure to prevent flood damage, mismanagement of natural resources. He let that hang in the air before adding, "Never mind that you don't own the damn resource." I drove to that first hearing in my old truck, dust on the dashboard, coffee sloshing in a thermos. I didn't dress up, just boots and a clean button-down. The courthouse steps echoed under my feet. Inside, the air smelled of paper, floor wax, and nerves. Karen showed up like she was marching to a coronation. 2 lawyers flanking her, 3 binders tucked under their arms, and a whole row of homeowners trailing behind like loyal soldiers. Some looked angry. Some just looked tired. One woman even wore a neck brace and glared at me like I'd personally shoved her into the creek. The judge, Melanie Groves, took her seat with sharp eyes and sharper patience. She flipped through the paperwork, sighed, and said, "Let's get to it." Karen's lawyers started strong. I'll give them that. They rolled out maps, flood models, glossy aerial photos. Claimed the first breach started on my property. Claimed my lack of modern water infrastructure made everything worse downstream. They painted me as some careless farmer clinging to outdated practices while families drowned in their living rooms. Julian didn't even blink. He waited, calm as stone, until they ran out of slides and self-righteous fumes. Then he stood up. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He laid down state waterway classifications, easement agreements, and Mara's hydrology report like bricks in a wall. Each one higher, stronger, shutting down their argument piece by piece. He said, "Ash Creek is a state-managed watercourse. My client has no authority to dam, divert, or alter it." He said, "Clear River Meadows modified the riparian buffer without permits." He said, "The damage occurred entirely downstream. My client's property remained stable and compliant." And then he dropped the bomb. From his folder, he pulled out the shoreline reinforcement contract cancellation, Karen's initials in black ink. "This document," Julian said, pausing so the judge could read every word, "shows that Clear River Meadows HOA canceled a scheduled flood defense project. Their decision undermined their own protections." Karen shifted in her seat like she'd sat on a nail. But Julian wasn't done. He presented Mara's full report, pointing out how their ornamental landscaping had narrowed the floodplain, funneled water toward houses, and turned decorative streams into ticking time bombs. He even had permits showing 3 of the damaged homes had been approved despite sitting squarely inside a flood risk zone. By the time he finished, the courtroom was silent enough to hear a pen cap click. Karen's lawyers tried a new angle. Even if I didn't legally own the creek, they argued, I still had moral stewardship. Julian actually laughed, out loud. "If moral stewardship is the new standard for liability," he said, "half the state should be on trial for bad weather." The judge didn't laugh, but she raised an eyebrow. Karen's entourage shifted in their seats, whispers spreading like wildfire. One man shook his head, stood, and walked out before recess. After lunch, Julian played his trump card, Harold's recording. Karen's voice filled the courtroom speakers, cold and smug. "If we make it through spring without a problem, no one will care about the river. It's just optics. We need the money for the landscaping project." The silence that followed was nuclear. Karen jerked upright, mouth opening, but her lawyer yanked her sleeve. The judge leaned forward and said, "Ms. Winters, remain silent unless addressed. You are not on trial." Then she added one small word that cut like a blade. "Yet." By day's end, Judge Groves ruled that the HOA's claim could proceed, but so would my counterclaim. She ordered the HOA to submit 2 years' worth of internal communications and financial records. That's when Karen's mask cracked. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps into the sunlight. Julian lit a cigarette, the first I'd seen him smoke in years. He only smokes after big wins or before bigger ones. He exhaled slow and grinned. "This ain't over," he said, "but we just got invited to the dance." Courtrooms aren't built for speed. They're built for slow cuts, peeling people open layer by layer until nothing's left but the truth, or whatever's closest to it. By the third week of hearings, Karen Winters was starting to rot right there on the stand, and I just had to sit back in my clean boots and watch. It started with Mara, my hydrologist. She walked in wearing a gray suit, posture so straight it looked carved out of steel. When she spoke, it wasn't loud, but every word landed like a nail hammered into oak. She explained how Ash Creek behaved exactly as predicted during heavy rainfall. She used terms like watershed behavior, riparian constriction, compensatory overbank flow. Karen's lawyers squirmed, flipping through binders like they'd misplaced the answer key. Then came the knife. "Did anything on Mr. Hoggard's land contribute to the downstream flooding?" the judge asked. Myra didn't blink. "Absolutely not. The upper banks were stable, no artificial obstruction, no redirected flow. If anything, his maintenance of natural buffers mitigated potential surge." Julian leaned back, hands folded, looking like a man sipping lemonade on a porch swing. But Myra wasn't finished. She pulled up side-by-side maps, pre- and post-development topography of Clear River meadows. One click of her laser pointer and the whole courtroom could see it. Marsh zones filled, retention ponds paved over, decorative rock channels pretending to be streams. "These were not streams," she said, matter of fact. "They were pipes waiting to burst." Then came the dagger. Could these damages have been avoided? "Yes," Mara said firmly, "if the HOA had followed even the most basic floodplain construction guidance." Silence heavy, final. Karen didn't lift her eyes from the table. But the real fire came next. Julian called Harold Vince. The man walked up in a plain jacket, no tie, calm but steady, like someone who'd been carrying the truth too long and was finally ready to set it down. He sat, swore in, and spoke for over an hour. He detailed internal meetings, board votes, and how Karen manipulated every outcome. He described warnings from engineers, red flags from contractors, motions she blocked for flood mitigation grants. He confirmed the shoreline reinforcement cancellation, the one she signed personally, and then he dropped the hammer. Documents, emails, meeting transcripts, budget drafts, copies Harold had made before resigning. Julian handed them to the judge one by one. The crown jewel was an email thread dated just 6 weeks before the flood. Karen to the HOA treasurer, "If we delay the shoreline work until fall, we can move funds toward the Eastgate landscaping project. Less visible risk, more visible improvement. Trust me, this flood thing is a non-event." The room sucked in a collective breath. Julian let it hang like smoke. Karen's lawyer scrambled to object, privileged internal communication, but Judge Groves waved it off. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "If a flood is a non-event, then why are we all sitting in this courtroom?" Boom. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse for Karen, Julian played one of Harold's recordings, a board meeting video. Karen on camera, smiling smug, saying, "Ash Creek is Daniel's problem until we figure out how to make it ours." The room shifted. Even the homeowners behind her, the same ones who once glared daggers at me in the grocery store, looked like they'd swallowed broken glass. Karen's lawyers tried pivot after pivot. Blame the county for culverts, blame the state for outdated flood maps. But the county engineer had already filed an affidavit. The flow only exceeded capacity because the HOA's landscaping had constricted the floodplain. It wasn't nature. It was arrogance wrapped in bylaws. Julian didn't call me to the stand that day. He didn't need to. He leaned over and whispered, "Let their own words do the work." And oh, did they. When court adjourned, I walked out to the steps into cool gray light. And there they were, a young couple from Clear River Meadows. Nervous, hesitant, like kids caught sneaking into the wrong church. The man cleared his throat. "We just wanted to say we didn't know. We thought, well, we were told you were the reason our home flooded." I studied his face, the woman clutching his arm. I could see the doubt, the guilt. "You were told wrong," I said simply. The woman's eyes softened. "If there's anything we can do—" I didn't answer right away. I looked past them, up at the clouds rolling over the hills, heavy with more rain. Then I said, "Make sure it never happens again." Because by then, I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about what happens when people like Karen think they can bend nature to their will, dodge the cost, and pin the wreckage on anyone but themselves. And as the clouds thickened overhead, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not fear, not anger, resolve. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt the ground shifting under my boots in my favor. By the time the final week of hearings rolled around, the courthouse didn't feel like enemy territory anymore. The security guard at the front door nodded when I walked in. Reporters stopped shouting questions. They'd already heard enough. Even the clerk started saving me a seat with a clear view of the bench. Julian called it the tide turning. I just called it gravity finally working the right direction. The hearing room was packed that morning. Reporters filled the back rows, residents lined the aisles, some curious, some loyal, some just hungry to see blood spilled on polished tile. I didn't dress up. Same boots, same jacket, same plain face. This wasn't about appearances, it was about survival. Judge Groves swept in, robe swaying like a storm cloud. She was done with sideshows. "No more slide decks, no more dramatics, we're here for justice," she said flatly. You could almost hear Karen swallow. The lawyers made their closing arguments, but the air was already heavy with truth. Karen's team leaned hard on sympathy, parading damage photos, hinting at moral duty. They painted me as heartless, indifferent, the stubborn farmer who wouldn't lift a finger while families drowned. Julian stood with nothing but a stack of documents, a hydrologist's report, and the calmest voice in the room. He didn't appeal to pity, he appealed to facts. My client cannot be held responsible for the behavior of a public watercourse he neither owns nor controls. To suggest otherwise is to put every landowner in the path of nature on trial for storms. He let that sink in, then added, "And if there was negligence here, it lies squarely with those who altered a floodplain, canceled safety measures, and gambled lives for landscaping optics." The courtroom went still. Even Karen's supporters stared down at their hands. And then Judge Groves began to speak. Her ruling came in layers, slow and deliberate, each word heavier than the last. This court finds that the plaintiff, Clear River Meadows HOA, has failed to demonstrate direct or proximate liability on the part of the defendant, Mr. Daniel Hoggard, regarding flood damage sustained during the incident of record. She paused, eyes flicking over the room. The claim that Mr. Hoggard is responsible for the behavior of a state-managed watercourse he neither owns nor controls is speculative at best, and at worst, a deliberate misrepresentation of environmental statutes. The words hit like a hammer. Karen's shoulders caved. Her lawyers scribbled pointlessly, their pens scratching the end of a dream. But Judge Groves wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice sharper now. The court further finds that the plaintiff's actions, including dissemination of defamatory claims, pursuit of knowingly unfounded litigation, and suppression of relevant internal communications, constitute malicious abuse of legal process. Her gavel cracked down. Damages awarded to the defendant, $950,000, $420,000 for reputational harm, $530,000 for legal fees, investigative costs, and punitive damages. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Karen didn't move. Her face was pale, frozen, as if someone had cut the strings holding her upright. One board member dropped his head into his hands. The woman in the neck brace stared at the floor. But it wasn't over. Judge Groves ordered the HOA to halt all public statements immediately, submit to an independent audit, and appoint an interim administrator until further notice. Then she turned her gaze directly at Karen. "And as for you, Ms. Winters, I strongly advise you to retain personal counsel." The room buzzed, gasps spreading like fire. Karen didn't walk out. She slunk, shoulders bent, entourage scattered. The reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, questions pelting like hail. I stood on the courthouse steps, sunlight bright and sharp against the hood of my truck. Julian lit another cigarette, his second of the trial, He only smokes after victories or before bigger ones. He took a drag, exhaled slow, and smirked. Well, he said, that's about as clean a win as they come. But I didn't feel giddy, not yet, because I knew the storm wasn't just legal, it was personal. Karen wasn't finished, not in her heart. People like her never just lose. They look for shadows to crawl into, angles to twist, fires to reignite. Still, for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my chest. I'd fought, bled through mud, and dragged truth out into the light. And somehow, against every banner, article, and whisper, I survived. When I got home that night, Ash Creek was running steady, low, whispering under the cottonwoods like nothing had ever happened. I stood by the fence, boots in the mud, and listened. For the first time in a long while, her voice didn't sound angry. The news hit Clear River Meadows like a landslide. By the next afternoon, word was already circulating at the gas station, the diner, even the post office. The HOA had lost, not just lost, been gutted. $950,000 owed, a public rebuke from a judge, and Karen winters herself under the shadow of personal liability. They called an emergency meeting that same night. This time the doors weren't closed. Every homeowner was invited, and from what I heard, half the town showed up just to watch. I wasn't there, but stories spread fast. The boardroom was packed, voices raised, papers waving in the air like flags of surrender. Karen tried to defend herself, said she'd been protecting community interests. But the recording, the email, the smug comment about Daniel's problem was still fresh in everyone's minds. They voted her out, unanimous. No speeches, no thanks for her service, just gone. By the end of the week, she'd been removed not only from the HOA, but also from her county job. Conflict of interest, ethics breach, PR nightmare, pick your reason, they all fit. She vanished like smoke, no more Lexus cruising down my road, no more banners strung across the HOA gates. Just silence. And silence never sounded so sweet. The press had a field day. One headline read, HOA hit with legal tsunami after targeting farmer. Another said simply, the flood that broke the HOA. My favorite came from a small-town paper. Turns out you can't sue the weather. Julian didn't bask in it long. He cracked a grin for maybe 30 seconds, then tucked the files away and told me, we're not suing anyone else unless they ask for it. But if you ever want a file for emotional damages, I'll draft a postcard. But truthfully, I didn't want another fight. I wanted peace. And peace finally came. The first morning after the ruling, I woke at 5:30, same as always. Coffee steaming in the chipped mug, boots by the door, tractor rumbling awake in the yard. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that wakes up your bones. I rolled out to the east field, tires leaving soft tracks in damp soil. No banners, no letters, no Lexus pulling up the drive like a snake in leather shoes. Just me, the land, and Ash Creek whispering the same way she always had, free, unbothered, steady. For weeks, I'd lived under the noise of accusations, threats, lawsuits. Now the silence rang louder than all of it. But silence wasn't the only thing that followed. Something else started to seep in: curiosity, connection. Neighbors who'd avoided me began waving again at the feed store. A man I barely knew dropped off a sack of seed and muttered, "Figured you could use this." One woman, a stranger, stopped by with pie. She said she lived in Clear River Meadows. Said she owed me an apology. I didn't ask for it, but I took the pie. Then came an idea, not from me, but from Julian. He called it the Riparian Rights Revival. Said we ought to mark the win not with banners or court filings, but with something better. A gathering. A fair. A way to remind folks what land and community really mean. So we did. A month after the ruling, we threw a proper Wyoming get-together. Nothing flashy. Canvas tents, hay bales for seats, long tables loaded with potluck dishes. Local bands strumming rusty guitars with voices better than half the charts. Kids running barefoot in the grass, chasing each other between fence posts. Mara showed up, trading her gray suit for jeans and a sun hat, sipping lemonade like it was sacred. Julian manned the grill, flipping ribs with the same precision he used in court. Even Harold came, Hawaiian shirt, sunglasses, looking freer than I'd ever seen him. Neighbors came from all over the county. Some just curious, some still drying out their basements, some grateful for the fight they didn't even know they'd been part of. A few folks from Clear River Meadows even showed, heads ducked but smiles genuine. One family brought a pie. I gave a short talk standing on a wooden crate by the cattle barn. Nothing fancy, just the truth. About rivers, about land, about how nature doesn't read bylaws. I didn't say Karen's name once. Didn't need to. Everyone knew who I meant when I said, and if someone hands you a $3 million check for rainwater, maybe hand it back with a shovel and ask where they were when the sandbags were going down. That line got a laugh, a real one, not bitter or forced. As the night stretched on, lanterns swinging in the breeze, laughter rising louder than the music, I felt something I hadn't in months. Belonging. Not the kind you buy with dues or bylaws, but the kind that comes when people stand shoulder to shoulder and realize they're stronger together than apart. And as I leaned against the fence, watching the creek shimmer under moonlight, I thought, maybe storms don't just wash things away. Sometimes they clear the ground for something better. A month after the dust settled, life started to feel normal again. The kind of normal you don't notice until it's been ripped away. Coffee at dawn, boots on wet grass, the low murmur of cattle waiting by the gate. The creek was back to herself, steady and unbothered, winding past the cottonwoods like nothing had ever happened. Sometimes I'd just stand there, listening to her whisper against the rocks, and wonder how in the world anyone ever thought she could belong to me, or to anyone. The town quieted, too. No more whispers at the feed store, no more glances over shoulders. Folks nodded again, lingered a little longer in conversation, sometimes even brought up the trial like it had already turned into local legend. "Remember when the HOA tried to bill you for the river?" someone would say, and the whole room would chuckle. It already felt like one of those stories you pass down until it grows into folklore. But for me, it wasn't folklore. It was scars. Invisible ones, sure, but deep all the same. You don't fight a war like that, even one with lawyers and papers instead of guns, without carrying something away from it. Nights were quieter, but sometimes I'd still wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I heard tires crunching on gravel, another Lexus rolling up the drive with bad news in a leather folder. Still, healing came in small ways. The note I'd tucked away in my desk drawer, "We believe you, don't back down," I read it sometimes when doubt crept back in. Reminded me I hadn't been fighting just for myself. I'd been fighting for the truth, for every farmer, rancher, or ordinary soul who's ever had someone with money and influence point a finger and say, "You're to blame." Because the truth is, it could have been anyone. That's what still chills me. You don't have to own a river to be accused of drowning a neighborhood. You just have to be the one standing close enough when people like Karen need a scapegoat. But the flip side is this. Sometimes the only thing stronger than a lie is a stubborn refusal to back down. That's what I carry now, more than the court victory, more than the money. The knowledge that even when the weight of a whole community's anger was thrown at me, I stood, I fought, and I outlasted. Life didn't stop, though. Chores still needed doing. Fences sagged, calves got sick, tractors broke down. Nature doesn't pause for courtroom drama. She doesn't care about headlines or verdicts. She only asks one thing of you, respect. Respect her strength, her timing, her rules. I always had, and maybe that's why Ash Creek had spared me, even when she punished everything downstream. Some evenings I still catch myself staring south, toward Clear River Meadows. The houses stand rebuilt now, shingles shining fresh, yards neat again. But I wonder if the people there feel safe anymore, or if they know deep down the truth Mara proved in her report, that their battle was never with me. It was with the land itself, and the land doesn't take kindly to arrogance. I don't feel anger anymore, not even toward Karen. Maybe pity, because what she lost wasn't just power or a position or a paycheck. She lost trust. And once a community sees through you, there's no banner big enough, no headline loud enough to hide who you really are. That's the quiet justice, I think. Courts hand down rulings, judges read verdicts. But the real judgment comes from the people who have to look you in the eye after it's all over. And Karen, she can't look anyone in the eye anymore. The last time I spoke at the fair, standing on that old wooden crate, I told folks, "Land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. You can put it on a map, fence it off, call it yours. But when the rain comes, when the river rises, you'll remember real fast who's in charge." People clapped, laughed even, but I wasn't joking, not really. Now when I walk the fence line at dusk and hear the creek whispering in the dark, I don't feel fear. I feel gratitude. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that storms don't just take. Sometimes they give. They give you clarity. They show you who's with you when the ground shakes. They strip away the noise until all that's left is what's real. And for me, what's real is this. A river I never owned, a fight I never asked for, and a truth I'll carry to my last breath. That dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like standing your ground alone against a flood of lies. And sometimes, just sometimes, the flood doesn't win. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.